everybody, name's Anne.
The elves and the shoemaker.
The elves and the shoemaker.
Chapter 1. Making Shoes. Once, an old shoemaker lived with his wife in a room above their workshop. Each day, he laid out his ladder, drew different shoe shapes, cut them out, and sewed them together.
Once, an old shoemaker lived with his wife in a room above their workshop. Each day, he laid out his ladder, drew different shoe shapes, cut them out, and sewed them together.
Then he stretched the shoe shapes over a wooden foot, cut out more leather, and sewed it on. Finally, he cut out thick soles, made holes in them with a huge needle, and sewed the soles onto the shoes.
Then he squeezed the shoe shape over a wooden foot, cut out more leather, and sewed it on. Finally, he cut out his soles, made holes in them with a hot needle, swelled the hole onto the shoe.
People loved watching the shoemaker at work. Nobody could go past his workshop without looking in. "Oh, look at those heels!" And at the end of the day, there was always a crowd of people wanting to buy his latest shoes.
People love watching the shoemaker at work. At work, nobody could go past his workshop without looking in. Oh, look at those holes! And at the end of the day, there was anywhere a crowd of people waiting to buy his latest shoe.
Chapter 2. Bad Business. One day, the shoemaker's wife spied trouble. A cart passed by the window with cheap shoes painted on the side. At first, she kept quiet. She didn't want to worry her husband. But slowly, the crowd outside their workshop became smaller and smaller. "Where is everyone?" "I think you should look outside, dear."
One day, the shoemaker wife spied trouble. The cart passed by the window with cheap shoes painted outside. At first, she kept quiet. She didn't want to worry her husband. But slowly, the crowd outside the workshop became smaller and smaller. "Where's everyone?" "I think you should look outside, dear."
A crafty shoe seller had set up a table at the end of their street. His shoes were badly sewn with poor leather, but he sold them at a bargain price. "Buy your cheap shoes here." "This is terrible," said the shoemaker. "He's putting me out of business. And his shoes are awful," said the shoemaker's wife. But the local people were delighted. Now they could buy 2 pairs of shoes for the price of one.
The crafty shoe seller has set up a table at the end of the street. His shoes were badly sealed with poor leather, but he sold them a bargain bright. "Buy your cheap shoe here." "This is terrible," said the shoemaker. "He putting me out of business." "And his shoes are awful," said shoemaker's wife. But Lucas' people were delighted. Now they could buy 2 pairs of shoes for the price of one.
Each day, the cheap shoe seller arrived with a new load of shoes. "How can he make them so quickly?" wondered the shoemaker. "He must have lots of people working for him."
Each day, the cheap shoe seller arrived with a new lot of shoes. "How can he make them so quickly?" wondered the shoemaker. "He must have a lot of people working for him."
Chapter 3. The Last Pair of Shoes. The next few months were miserable for the shoemaker and his wife. With very little business, they were running out of money. Soon, the shoemaker could only afford enough leather to make one more pair of shoes.
The next few months were miserable for the shoemaker and his wife. With a very little business, they were running out of money. Soon the shoemaker could only afford enough leather to make one more pair of shoes.
"I am ruined." He cut out the shoe shapes and laid them on his work table. Then he yarned. "I am too tired to sew this today," he sighed. Early next morning, he went downstairs and stopped in amazement. "Am I still dreaming?" he asked himself. "How? What? Who?" There on his work table stood a perfect pair of shoes. Someone had nearly sewn up his pieces of leather. What's more, they had sewn shiny buckles on the front. The shoemaker was baffled.
He cut out the shoe set and laid them on his work. "I'm too tired to do this today," he sighed. Early next morning, he went downstairs and stopped in amaze. "I am still dreaming?" he asked himself. "How? What? Who?" There on his work table stood a perfect pair of shoes. Someone had neatly sealed up his pieces of leather. What's more, they had sealed shiny buckle on the front. The shoemaker was baffled.
Chapter 4. It must be magic. "They are lovely," said the shoemaker's wife, putting the shoes in the window. Before long, a rich gentleman came in. "Those shoes are just what I'm looking for," he cried. "They are much better than the cheap pairs down the road." And he paid for the shoes with a solid gold coin. "Keep the change."
"They are lovely," said the shoemaker's wife, putting the shoe in the window. Before long, the gentleman came in. "Those shoes are just what I'm looking for," he cried. "They're much better than the cheap pair down the road." And she paid for the shoe with a solid gold coin. "Keep the change."
Now the shoemaker could buy enough leather to make 2 pairs of shoes. As he cut them out, he saw how late it was. "I will finish them tomorrow," he thought. But by morning the job was already done. 2 neat pairs of shoes were waiting for him, fancy bows and all. "I'd never have thought of adding bows."
Now the shoemaker could buy enough leather to make 2 pairs of shoes. As he cut them out, he saw how late it was. "I'll finish them tomorrow," he thought. But by morning, the job was already done. 2 neat pairs of shoes were waiting for him, fancy bows and all. "I never have thought of adding bows."
That day, the puzzled shoemaker had more happy customers. "Aren't they gorgeous?" Now he had enough money to buy leather for 4 pairs of shoes. After cutting out the leather, the shoemaker locked up and went to bed. The next morning, he couldn't believe his luck. On the table stood 4 perfect pairs of shoes. "It must be magic!" he cried.
That day, the puzzle shoemaker had 2 more happy customers. "And they gorgeous." Now he has enough money to buy leather for 4 pairs of shoes. After cutting out the leather, the shoemaker locked up and went to bed. The next morning, he couldn't believe his luck. On his table stood 4 perfect pairs of shoes. "It must be magic," he cried. "Are you sure you locked the door?" And so it went on. The more later,
"Are you sure you locked the door?" And so it went on. The more leather the shoemaker cut, the more shoes he found in the morning.
and so it went on. The more leather the shoemaker cut, the more shoes he found in the morning.
Chapter 5. The 2 Rivals. This is the life. Within weeks, business was booming. The shoemaker had plenty of money and very little to do. He was a happy man. The cheap shoe seller was not so happy. He had angry customers to deal with. My shoes broke after 3 days. I want my money back. And word had spread about his awful shoes. No one wanted to buy them.
Within a week, business was booming. The shoemaker had plenty of money and very little to do. He was a happy man. The cheap seller was not so happy. He had angry customers to deal with. My shoe broke after 3 days. I want my money back. And word as bit about his awful shoes. No one wanted to buy them.
One evening, there was a knock on the shoemaker's door. It was the shoe seller. What can I do for you? Asked the shoemaker. You can't stop ruining my business, shouted the seller. He picked up one of the shoemaker's new shoes and studied it carefully. And you can give me back my helpers, he snorted. What helpers? We don't know what you mean.
One evening, there was a knock at the shoemaker door. It was the shoe seller. What can I do for you? Asked the shoemaker. You can stop running my business, said the seller. He picked up one of the shoemaker's new shoes and studied it carefully. And you can give me back my helper. He snorted. What helper? We don't know what you mean.
With a scowl, the shoe seller stormed out of the workshop. The shoemaker and his wife looked at each other. Who do you think is making our shoe? Whispered the shoemaker. I don't know, said his wife, but let's find out.
With a scout, the shoe seller stormed out of the workshop. The shoemaker and his wife looked at each other. Who do you think is making shoes? Whispered the shoemaker. I don't know, said his wife, but let's find out.
Chapter 6 The Secret Shoemakers. That night, they decided to stay awake and see what happened. They hid behind some coats in a corner of the workshop. Everything was quiet until midnight. Two little elves rushed in, wearing nothing but rags. They sat down at the table and quickly began to sew.
That night they decided to stay awake and see what happened. They hid behind some coats in the corner of the workshop. Everything was quiet until midnight. Two little Eve rushed in, wearing nothing but rags. They sat down at the table and quickly began to sew.
The shoemaker and his wife listened carefully to the elf's chatter. "This is better than making cheap shoes in that rotten attic," said the first elf. "I wish the other elves had escaped as well," said the second. "Never mind," replied the first elf. "If we put that wicked shoe seller out of business, the other elves will be free too," cried the second. "Hurry up or we'll be spotted. I'm almost done."
The shoemaker's wife listened carefully to the Eve chatter. "The better than making cheap shoes in that rotten attic," said first elf. "I wish the other elf has escaped as well," said the second. "Never mind," replied the first elf. "If we put that wicked shoe seller out of business, the other elf will be free soon," cried the second. "Hurry up, or we'll be spotted. I'm almost done."
"Race you down the street!" As the sun began to rise, they finished the last shoe and disappeared through the door. The shoemaker and his wife were astonished. "I think I'm going crazy," said the shoemaker. "Were those really elves? That's incredible." His wife nodded. "And it sounds like that shoe seller is forcing other elves to work for him," she said. "No wonder he can make so many shoes."
Raced you down the street as the sun began to rise. They finished at last shoes and disappeared through the door. The shoemaker and his wife were astonished. "I think I'm going crazy," said the shoemaker. "Were those really elves? That's incredible." His wife nodded. "And it sounds like the shoe seller is forcing other elves to work for him," she said. "No wonder he can make so many shoes."
Chapter 7. Revenge. Over breakfast the next day, the shoemaker and his wife discussed how they could help the elves. By 10 o'clock, there was already a room full of people wanting to buy the shoemaker's new shoes. "If we keep selling these lovely shoes," said his wife, "the shoe seller will go bust." By midday, they had sold 30 pairs. They were eating lunch when they heard the sound of a cart. The cheap shoe seller was leaving early.
One breakfast and all over breakfast the next day, the shoemaker with his wife discussed how they could help the Eve. By 10 o'clock, there was already a room full of people waiting to buy their shoemaker new shoes. "If we keep selling the lovely shoes," said his wife, "the shoe seller will go best. By the midday, they had saw the teddy bear. They were eating lunch when they heard the sound of the cart. The shoe seller was leaving early.
A mob of angry customers were hopping after him, shaking their fists and pelting him with broken shoes. "There goes the cheat! And he won't dare come back!" The shoemaker and his wife breathed a sigh of relief. "How can we ever thank our two helpers?" wondered the shoemaker. "Let's make them some proper clothes," said his wife.
The mob of angry customers were hopping after him, shaking their fists and pelting him with broken shoes. There go the cheese, and he won't dare come back. The shoemaker and his wife breathed a sigh of relief. How can we ever thank our two helpers? Wondered the shoemaker. Let's make them some proper clothes, said his wife.
Chapter 8. The Elf's Escape. All day, the shoemaker's wife worked at her sewing machine, making little suits for the elves. The shoemaker made 2 tiny pairs of shoes. That night, instead of leaving letter shapes on the table, the shoemaker left 2 piles of clothes. Then he and his wife hid behind the coats again and waited for the elves to arrive. What?
All day, the shoemaker wife worked at her sewing machine, making little suits for elf. The shoemaker made 2 tiny pairs of shoes. That night, instead of leaving leather shape on the table, the shoemaker left 2 piles of clothes. Then he and his wife hid behind the coats again and waited for the elf to arrive.
Wow, this must be for us. I've never worn shoes before. The elves were delighted with their new outfits. They scrambled into them and danced around the room. How handsome we look! Here they are, called a voice from the street. A second later, there were 14 more elves in the workshop. The 2 elves stopped dancing. "Hey," said one, "how did you all escape?"
Wow, they must be for us. I never worn shoes before. The elves were delighted with the new outfits. They sprang into them and danced around the room. How handsome we look! Here they are, called the voice from the street. A second later, there were 14 more elves in the workshop. 2 elves stopped dancing. "Hey," said one, "how did you all escape?"
"The shoe seller let us go," cried an excited elf. "He's giving up selling shoes. We put spells on our sewing to make the shoes fall apart. Now we're going to celebrate, said another. Come on, and you can tell us why you are dressed like people. Laughing and joking, the elves skipped off down the street. The shoemaker and his wife smiled as they watched them go.
The shoe seller, let us go! Cried an excited elf. He giving up selling shoes. We put spell on our skilling to make the shoe fall apart. How are we going to celebrate? Said another. Come on, can and you can tell us why you dress like people. Laughing and joking, the elf skipped up down the street. The shoemaker and his wife smiled as they watched them go.
They might have lost their magic helpers, but now they were in business again. They had plenty of customers and lots of ideas for new shoes. As for the elves, they never sold another shoe.
They might have lost the magic helper, but now they were business again. They have plenty of customers and lot of ideas for new shoes. And for the elf, they never sold another shoes. Goodbye.